The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the manfromleng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, the Court of the Great Old Ones over at Fantasy Flight Games has taken notice of my profane rituals and answered my eldritch prayers with a spoiler from the Dream Eaters, the 5th Deluxe expansion for the Arkham Horror LCG. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before I continue, I'd like to thank the patrons who keep the lights on here in my tiny little hut on the Plateau of Leng. These people have gone above and beyond to bring you the content I create for the Arkham Horror LCG. If you'd like to become a patron to support the channel's goals and enjoy patron-only content, follow the link below, sign up for the tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. I would be eternally grateful for your support. Without further ado, let's get started. Fantasy Flight Games was generous enough to provide not one but 2 spoilers for the Dream Eaters, which will be released in a few short weeks. The first card is the Hungering Blade, Calamitous Blade of Celiphae. It's a 3-cost asset that costs 1 experience point. It has a combat skill icon and the item, weapon, melee, relic, and curse traits. It is limit 1 per deck, and it has an additional cost. To put this card into play, you must search your bonded cards for 3 copies of Bloodlust and shuffle them into your deck. The Hungering Blade has the following game text: Action, fight. You get +1 combat skill value for this attack for each attached copy of Bloodlust. This attack deals +1 damage. If this attack defeats an enemy, place 1 resource on this card from the token bank as an offering. The Hungering Blade takes up a hand slot. The question you're probably asking right now is, what the hell is Bloodlust? Well, it's a freaking weakness of all things. It has the Madness trait and is bonded to the Hungering Blade. It has the following game text: Revelation, remove 2 offerings from the Hungering Blade to attach Bloodlust to it. If you cannot, take 1 horror and shuffle Bloodlust back into your deck. As a free triggered ability, while attacking with the Hungering Blade, you may shuffle Bloodlust into your deck to deal +1 damage for this attack. Max once per attack. I have 3 things to say about these cards. First of all, I love the name. Calamitous Blade of Celiphae has a nice ring to it. Second, the art on both of these cards is simply fantastic. Kudos to Patrick McAvoy for capturing the essence of this menacing weapon and the madness it induces. And third, I love this approach to card design. I don't know whether the Hungering Blade is any good, more on that in a moment, but designer Matt Newman has hit a thematic and design home run by bonding a player card to a weakness. I can't wait to see how he explores this design space in the future. Alright, with my fawning over the art and design out of the way, let's discuss whether the Hungering Blade is a useful tool in an investigator's arsenal or simply decorative. The Hungering Blade is the proverbial double-edged sword. If you play the Hungering Blade and stack all 3 copies of Bloodlust on it, you've got a relic that will add 3 to your combat skill value and dish out 2 damage to an enemy. 3 if you shuffle a copy of Bloodlust back into your draw deck. Enemies with 3 health are the bane of a Guardian's existence, so the ability to take one down with 1 action is fantastic. However, once the Hungering Blade hits the table, you'd better get busy killing enemies to rack up those offering tokens. Otherwise, each time you draw Bloodlust, you're going to take 1 horror. Worse, offerings are the only thing that will sate your Bloodlust, since the weakness is shuffled back into your deck whenever you draw it, unless you spend 2 offerings to negate it. That has the potential to become very painful if your draw deck runs low on cards and the density of those weakness rises. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's break the Hungering Blade down line by line. The first thing worth noting is that the Hungering Blade is limit 1 per deck. Playing singletons in your draw deck is always somewhat problematic because the odds of drawing one of them are always going to be slightly less than if you had a full play set. This problem is compounded by the fact that there are very few ways to draw cards in the Guardian class. Soothing Melody, Second Wind, Enchanted Blade 3, Stand Together 3, and Taunt 2 will draw you a card or 2, but one of those cards is a bonded card in its own right, while 3 of them require you to spend a bunch of experience points first. Fortunately, Guardians have a few tricks up their sleeves to find the Hungering Blade quickly. First, there's Prepared for the Worst, a level 0 Guardian event from Blood on the Altar that lets you search the top 9 cards of your deck for a weapon asset, and the Hungering Blade certainly qualifies as a weapon. If you're playing a weapon that is limit 1 protect, Prepared for the Worst is an essential addition to your deck. The second option is to play Mark Harrigan, who may draw a card whenever he places a damage on a card he controls. If enemies and nasty treacheries that deal damage are in short supply, Mark can damage himself and dig through his draw deck that much faster with his signature asset, Sophie. Between Mark's special ability and Prepared for the Worst, the soldier should have the Hungering Blade in play in no time. Getting the Hungering Blade into play quickly will be important because you need to shuffle not 1, not 2, but 3 weaknesses into your draw deck to play it. The larger your draw deck when you play the Hungering Blade, the more dilute those weaknesses will be, and the more time you will have to rack up the offerings before you go mad with Bloodlust. Bloodlust is a nasty little weakness since it will ping you for a horror and then shuffle itself back into your draw deck. And as we all know, most combat-oriented Guardians don't have a lot of sanity to spare. Poor Mark Harrigan has only 5 to work with, so drawing a couple Bloodlusts in quick succession could put him on the brink of madness. Now, I don't know what the odds are of drawing back-to-back-to-back copies of Bloodlust are, but the fact that the card shuffles itself back into your draw deck means the potential is there to have a very bad day, especially if your draw deck is a little on the thin side. Once the Hungering Blade hits the table, you'd better go on one hell of a killing spree to rack up those offerings, have some way to soak the additional horror, or ideally both. Fortunately, Guardians and off-class Guardians have plenty of good ways to soak that horror, including a host of powerful allies and items, as well as other assets, such as something worth fighting for from the secret name. You need at least 2 offerings on the Hungering Blade before the first Bloodlust pops, so you may want to consider the potential number of targets around before you slap it down on the table. Unfortunately, players have very little control over the number of enemies in the encounter deck or on the table. We've all had those games where we've drawn nothing but treacheries. Obviously, this is a bigger problem in solo than in multiplayer, where enemies tend to be a lot more plentiful due to the sheer number of encounter cards drawn each turn. Guardians interested in experimenting with the Hungering Blade should probably pack on the Hunt, a Guardian event from Black Star's Rise. It lets you search the top 9 cards of the encounter deck for an enemy and draw it, ensuring you've got something to offer the Hungering Blade once it hits the table. There are some scenarios, such as the Miskatonic Museum and the Secret Name, where enemies are in short supply, or scenarios such as Heart of the Elders, where there are certain enemies that cannot be defeated by a normal means. Playing the Hungering Blade in these types of scenarios is asking for trouble. It would be nice if the Hungering Blade had 2 combat skill icons rather than 1 for these types of situations, but unfortunately beggars can't be choosers. As for the Dream Eater cycle, I expect there will be plenty of enemies to offer the Hungering Blade. Judging by the spoiler for the Ancient Zoog that appeared in the card fan revealed as part of the cycle's announcement, locations could be swarming with little angry Zoogs. If swarm cards are considered to be enemies, the Hungering Blade will be overflowing with offerings to satisfy your bloodlust. The third thing worth mentioning about the Hungering Blade is that while it deals that sweet extra damage each attack, it doesn't come with a native combat skill bonus. If you want to boost your combat skill value, you will need to stack Bloodlust on the blade first. That means you'll have to rely on your base combat skill value plus skill cards and resource-fueled talents to get the job done for the first couple of enemies. The lack of a native combat skill value bonus is unlikely to be a problem for Guardians like Mark Harrigan, who has a base combat skill value of 5, or even an off-class Guardian such as William York, who clocks in with a combat skill value of 4. It could be a problem for investigators with average to below average combat skill values. Ursula Downs, for example, may purchase the Hungering Blade because it has the Relic trait, but she is going to struggle mightily to rack up those offerings with her base combat skill value of 1. The Hungering Blade costs only 1 experience point, which means it's available to no less than 10 investigators, 11 if you include Tommy Muldoon, the Guardian investigator from the Dream Eaters expansion. That said, the Hungering Blade is very much geared toward combat-oriented investigators such as Mark Harrigan and Zoe Samras, who are going to spend most, if not all, of their actions tracking down and killing enemies. Mark Harrigan seems like an obvious contender to play the Hungering Blade despite his low sanity. Mark's ability to draw additional cards coupled with his high base combat skill value means he should be able to find and play the Hungering Blade quickly. Mark's card draw ability could come back to bite him in the ass once the Hungering Blade hits the table though, since Bloodlust will be that much more likely to pop. If I was playing Mark, I'd probably try to stack Bloodlusts on the blade and then shuffle them back into the draw deck judiciously, all the while trying to draw through the remainder of the deck to avoid a situation where I've got a handful of cards in my deck, and 3 of them are Bloodlusts. Zoe Samaras could also put the Hungering Blade to good use. She's got slightly more sanity than Mark, and she has the potential to dish out 4 damage between the bonus provided by her Elder Sign ability, the Blade, and Bloodlust. If Zoe is concerned about sustaining horror from Bloodlust, she can team up with her friendly neighborhood zealot, Brother Xavier, or she can reach for out-of-class cards like Peter Sylvester Zero from the Survivor class. I'd also be interested in experimenting with the Hungering Blade in an investigator like William York. William could use assets such as Cherished Keepsake and Peter Sylvester to soak any horror he sustains from Bloodlust while stacking offerings on the blade. That's going to do it for my look at the Hungering Blade and Bloodlust. A big thank you to Fantasy Flight Games for sharing these cards with me. I really want to like the Hungering Blade, but I'm not entirely convinced that the bonus combat skill value and damage are worth the price of admission. Shuffling 3 copies of a weakness into your deck, a weakness that deals 1 horror and then shuffles itself back into your deck at that, is a significant drawback for a card that's basically the same as a 32 Colt until you've defeated at least 2 enemies and possibly quite a few more. Bloodlust is better than your average weakness since you can stack it on the Hungering Blade for a damage bonus if you're ready for it. But most of the time, drawing a weakness is pretty awful for 2 simple reasons. First, you miss out on drawing a card that could have helped you in the long run, even if you end up committing that card to a skill test. And 2, something terrible happens to you. I wouldn't be surprised if a few players out there decide the Hungering Blade simply isn't worth the hassle, especially since the 32 Colt 2 just came out in Return to the Path to Carcosa, eliminating some of the issues that it has with ammo. It's great that you can shuffle a copy of Bloodlust back into your draw deck to deal extra damage, but shuffling weaknesses back into your draw deck becomes somewhat problematic if you don't have that many cards left in the deck to begin with. Now, I could be mistaken about this, but the wording on Bloodlust suggests that you could end up with a draw deck consisting of nothing but copies of Bloodlust, in which case you would draw Bloodlust over and over again until you were able to stack it on the blade or draw X+1 cards, where X is the number of copies of Bloodlust in your draw deck. That type of nightmare scenario is remote, but players will need to carefully consider whether shuffling Bloodlust back into their draw decks is worth the trouble, given the number of cards in their draw deck, the number of offering tokens on the Hungering Blade, and the current board state, especially in terms of enemies, both real and potential. At least there's no limit to the number of offerings that you can stack on the Hungering Blade, so if you do shuffle a Bloodlust back into your deck, you're ready to deal with it when it rears its ugly head again. Ultimately, I think the value of the Hungering Blade will depend a lot on the nature of the enemies in the Dream Eater cycle. If investigators are overrun by swarms of angry Zoogs with low fight and health values, the Hungering Blade is an ideal choice. It won't run out of ammo like a firearm, it doesn't have the engagement restrictions of the machete, and you should generate offering tokens quickly enough to counter the effects of Bloodlust. If you do need a little extra oomph in the damage department, say to deal with a boss toward the end of a scenario, you can shuffle a copy of Bloodlust back into your deck to deal 3 damage. That's pretty good. If swarms don't pan out in the Dream Eater cycle, then the Hungering Blade could find a home in combat-oriented multiplayer decks where the odds of encountering plenty of enemies to feed it are fairly high. Playing the Hungering Blade seems a little too risky in solo, since you really are at the mercy of the encounter deck. Let me know what you think of the Hungering Blade in the comments down below. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about this card. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Remember to head over to Patreon to sign up to become a patron of the channel. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.